One of the things you learn as you become more experienced with growing vegetables is that some crops are very easy to grow, getting good yields with very little effort. Other crops, on the other hand, are more difficult and verging on impossible, often due to the wrong climate or context. But some crops are more perplexing, as it seems that they should be easy to grow because they're so common, but prove to be quite problematic. I've had trouble growing carrots. Sometimes it feels that it's not worth the bother, and I should focus on more reliable crops. If carrots weren't such an important and useful vegetable that almost everybody wants lots of. It is, of course, possible to grow a good crop of carrots in this climate and soil, and I've produced really high yields of very tasty carrots in the past. But looking back at all the records of all the carrot crops that I've grown in the different gardens, I've had more failure than success, more disappointment than satisfaction. This lack of success can be due to a number of different factors. And the main crop of carrots that I planted last year in the newly dug black plot suffered from a few of them, plus a new one. I started out with high expectations as I had selected the best of the beds that we had dug last year for growing this crop. The topsoil was fairly loose and deep and didn't have as many perennial weeds and stones as the other beds. This is all good for carrots, and I had hoped for great crops, so I sowed 3 rows down the 20-meter or 66-foot long bed. This would have produced about 1,000 large storage carrots if things had gone well, more than enough to feed ourselves and many of our neighbors through the autumn, winter, and spring. But things didn't go so well. Although I sowed the seeds carefully and during good weather, there were bare patches in the lines of tiny carrot seedlings when they finally came up. This could have been failed germination caused by inconsistent soil moisture, but the pattern pointed more towards slugs being the culprit, clearing sections of seedlings before I even noticed that they had germinated. The lazy bed method that we had used to dig the soil had buried most of the weed seeds that had built up on the site over the previous few years. So thankfully the carrot seedlings didn't have to compete too much with a flush of faster growing weed seeds. I did have to carefully extract some remaining perennial weeds without damaging too many of the delicate carrot seedlings, but unfortunately there was just too much scotch grass at one end of the bed, and I decided to dig that area in, abandoning about 15% of the crop. I thought I had a good strategy for protecting the crop from the carrot fly by covering the entire bed with horticultural fleece. But the wind and a roaming dog managed to rip a number of holes in the delicate fabric, allowing the carrot flies to get in to lay their eggs at the base of the plants. In the end, quite a few carrots were damaged by the burrowing larvae. Some of the harvested carrots had split during the growing season, more than I would have expected given the reasonably consistent rain we have had over the growing season. Slugs had also returned to feast on the carrots both on the surface and below ground, and some of the tops of the roots had been gnawed at by mice. All of these issues would have been frustrating enough, but the bigger issue I found was that a lot of the carrot roots had forked. There was also a strange rotting of the carrot flesh and a lot of other damage to the roots under the soil. Forked carrots are a reasonably common occurrence, and 3 reasons are typically given. Most obvious is the presence of stones in the soil, which I still have quite a lot of. Another potential cause is that when lots of fertility has been recently added to the soil, apparently burning the delicate carrot roots. It is also theorized that if there's too much fertility in a layer of soil, then the carrot roots don't need to go any deeper to get the nutrients, so they branch out horizontally instead. But none of these reasons seem to really explain what I found. Interestingly, almost all of the forking of the carrots in this crop occurred at a deeper level in the soil, which seemed to coincide with the vegetation that had been buried by the lazy bed technique. I hadn't really thought about how this decaying vegetation would affect the crop. This growing bed had been dug last April, and the carrot seeds would have been sown about 6 weeks later. So by the time the tiny taproot of the carrot seedlings had found their way deeper into the soil, there would have been quite active decomposition of this buried vegetation. But the layer would have been relatively thin, and so I can't imagine that the heat from any decomposition would have been able to build up enough to deter or damage the carrot root tip. The theory that the hotspots of nitrogen could have burnt the tips of the roots is possible, but it doesn't seem like the full story to me. The vegetation that had been buried had been quite old and wasn't fresh growth, and wouldn't have been excessively rich in nitrogen. It wasn't just that the roots had forked. There was that odd rotting of a few of the carrots, which I hadn't seen before, and other types of blemishes and damage. Thinking about what could have been causing all of this, I remembered that the decomposition of the buried vegetation would have involved a lot of biological activity. I had enabled the development of an entire ecosystem buried under the soil, no doubt with a significant diversity of different types of organisms. With this, things started to make more sense to me. The carrot roots had run into an unusually active and diverse soil ecosystem. I suspect that the roots of the carrot had been consumed by the soil organisms and had been forced to branch out. I wonder if this is the same thing that might be happening with recently fertilized soil. It might not be that the excessive nitrogen has burnt the roots of the carrots, but rather perhaps that the excessive fertility has boosted the biological activity and the tiny root of the carrot has become either collateral damage or part of the feast. Well, that's my hypothesis for now anyways. Some plants, such as squashes, potatoes, and brassicas, seem to do quite well with this type of active ecosystem buried in the soil. Obviously, carrots don't, given that the young roots can be damaged and the swollen carrot can be consumed by the unusually active and diverse underground biology. So instead of harvesting a full bed of main crop carrots that would have seen us and many of my neighbors supplied through the winter, the total edible yield was far less than anticipated. I hardly found a single root that wasn't impacted, often by more than one issue. In the future, I will be very hesitant to grow a carrot crop in soil with recently buried vegetation. But if I was determined to grow this valuable crop in new ground again, I would at least want to delay sowing for a bit to allow the biological activity to slow down a bit. The option of harvesting the carrots earlier would help reduce some of the damage, and I could also try to sow a variety of carrot with a shorter root. Or I could simply remove most of the vegetation rather than digging it in. In the future, I will also be continuing my efforts to better manage germination, slugs, weeds, and the carrot fly problem. This is all part of the skill building process, working towards being better able to consistently produce a good crop of great tasting carrots. Food waste is a popular concern these days, with a lot of emphasis being placed on not rejecting ugly vegetables, which is a hard thing to change. But things are different when you grow your own. Unlike most consumers, many gardeners will put in the effort and time that it takes to salvage whatever is edible out of a damaged or misshapen crop. But alternatively, we could simply abandon the crop, digging it in or composting it. The argument could be made that we should be making the most out of any resource to feed people, thereby reducing the amount of food that needs to be imported. But the argument could be made that it is also valuable to feed the worms and other composting organisms that will in turn feed the soil, which will allow us to grow a better crop next year. Although I'd much rather harvest a full crop of beautiful vegetables, an unintended soil building or composting crop is not a bad fallback option, but only really in the context of abundance, and abundance is what I'm working towards in the black plot.